Hmm.
Now there are two paths where logically, like I could ask you how the keyboard comes around and is that connected because I'm like, okay, keyboard computers he's studied.
Yeah, let's go there. It's an easy pathway actually,
Yeah, yeah,
because the other one is random.
sure.
Um, it's not random actually, but it's a different pathway.
Huh.
So the keyboard actually was a grad school project for me. So that's
Okay.
where it started. So I've been working on it for 5 years now.
Yeah.
Um,
What is it?
so there's a sort of larger theme and there's a smaller theme. So let's start with the
Yeah.
specific thing. The specific thing is that it's a new type of keyboard for the Arabic script. So I'm starting with Urdu, but it could generalize to other things. And the idea being that typing modes of the current Arabic script are stuck in the way that typewriters were built. And there are more things that we can do with software that can make that typing experience different and hopefully better,
Okay.
that we just haven't got around to trying.
Okay.
So there's a couple of innovation. So one is just the idea कि अभी तक हमारे पास बे पे ते के बटन different होते हैं. Uh, if you are typing in multiple languages, that means suppose if you are typing Sindhi
Hmm.
and you are typing Urdu, then
Hmm.
you will use whatever keyboard has the superset of letters because Sindhi has more letters than Urdu. And in software now we can compress those keys into one. Like
Okay.
anything that looks the same, like be
Yeah.
pe te,
Yeah.
it doesn't need to have separate buttons because software can just add the dots for you.
Okay.
So that's kind of one innovation, which is okay. Can we
Like
start?
how do you mean? Like do I जैसे वो होता है ना special
Mm,
characters where you toggle them
mm,
via alt दबा के जो is that how you mean it or do you mean that the software contextually like
just
autocorrect?
autocorrects, auto completes
अच्छा.
like on a
Okay.
phone. So आप एक बटन दबाते हैं, so you will type the key that looks like a bay but पे कोई नहीं है, and then अगर उसमें लफ्ज में ते है या बे है वो खुद ही
Right.
निकल जाएंगे.
Right.
Um,
More like
which is pretty
intuitive
natural.
sort of.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty natural interaction for people that have been typing on smartphones. And the other thing that it does is it has multiple benefits. The first is that it reduces the number of keys. So a
Hmm.
normal Urdu keyboard has 39 letters. This has 21. A normal Sindhi keyboard has 53 letters. And so for people that are our parents' generation or
Yeah.
our kids' generation, who have not grown up with this reality of the world as imbued, then having a much simpler way to start typing reduces that barrier to entry.
Okay.
And so you find it just much easier and much less intimidating to go into, because there's less stuff there. So that's one part. The second is that it opens the door for multilingual typing in the future. So I'm not there yet, but that is the goal, which
Sure.
is to do like a kind of multilingual autocorrect, the same way that happens in kind of a Latin keyboard, which is that to type French or to type English, you are not switching keyboards.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can do this, use the same instrument, and so we haven't done that for the Arabic script yet. So that is the goal to get into.
How did you come to this idea? Because it's very specific.
It is very specific. So the larger idea is that I was interested in building Urdu language technology. So for me, the question was, how do we better represent Urdu on the internet? Because as a kind of population of the world, or in terms of language speaking, Urdu is one of the largest speaking languages in the world, but it's still, if you talk to most Urdu speakers, they are not using technology in Urdu. They're not consuming
Yeah.
content
Yeah.
in Urdu,
Yeah.
especially written. Audio still works. And so for me, the interest was, okay, why is that happening? And what are the things that we need to build to change that perception?
Hmm.
Once you start going into it, you realize this has been happening for centuries. This is not a new phenomenon. So one of the stories I like to tell is that when the Gutenberg Bible was published in Europe, which is the introduction of movable type to Europe, उसके फौरन बाद printing presses in other languages and other scripts started popping up, in Europe as well.
Yeah.
But it took 300 years for Arabic to be printed in movable type in any large format. 300 years, a long time, right? And so once you realize this happened before, फिर आप कहते हैं अच्छा internet पे भी उर्दू नहीं, and then you see, okay, these patterns are very, very similar. Like it is
Yeah.
too similar to ignore.
Right.
And so underneath, once you start digging the surface, you realize that there's most of the technology that we use today was built in the West and is Latin first. And the way that other languages have adapted is, okay, what is the smallest change that we can make for it to work with our language? Arabic script has some intrinsic constraints, such as the fact that the letters are connected, it's cursive,
Yeah.
which make this transition difficult. And so often the way that we have done dealt with this compromise. We're like, अच्छा language को कैसे बदल सकते हैं fit करने के लिए technology में. And I think that is the other way around. Like, but at the point now, especially with software, where we no longer have hardware constraints, that this method of working is um, is no longer necessary and in fact restrictive and is damaging to the underlying culture. And so the goal is, okay, where can we start to change this perception? So for me, there's lots of areas that need work. Voice interaction needs work. Underlying language understanding needs work. Fonts need a lot of work. Like fonts, a lot of people care about. Fonts need a lot of work. And keyboards for me became an interesting area as well. So I started with typography. So a lot of whenever I present this work, I talk about typography a lot because that's where I started. The reason I went to the keyboard was because for me, if the goal was to actually build language technology that changes the course of other people's engineering work as well, then building a keyboard is interesting because I have to build multiple layers of technology that are each useful in their own regard. So for example, मुझे अगर पता होता मैं किस मसले में पढ़ रहा हूँ तो मैं शायद बहुत सोच समझ के पढ़ता. That to get this autocorrect working, you need a underlying data set, right? Which is that you need for the algorithms to make better predictions. They need good data to go off of, and there is no good Urdu data. That is open source.
It would have to start by some, I suppose, like a dictionary, perhaps even just to have like a baseline of words.
Yeah, so
and
a dictionary
then variations.
And most of the language, the way that language models work today is what are the most commonly used words,
right?
And what is the most common order of words. Right. So you need some written prose as well.
Right.
So अब वो ढूंढने के लिए अच्छा you're like, okay, what can I start scraping? So anybody can build a proprietary data set, right? You can like scrape stuff on the internet, build a proprietary data set, and then suddenly you realize that all of it is wrong.
Okay. Wrong how?
If you take wrong in the sense that अगर आप English में अगर आपको text मिले जिसमें loves के बीच में randomly space डला हो या कोई random typo, you would consider that doesn't happen in English text very often.
Yeah.
It is surprisingly prevalent in Urdu text. In fact, the amount of digitally typeset Urdu text that underneath the characters are correctly placed is minuscule, very, very small. I can probably tell you the websites where it's going to be correct.
And why do we think this is? Just because of the issues that lead you towards thinking that this keyboard is necessary? Those compromises have resulted in these poor data sets.
That and then a couple of other things. One is मतलब typing tools नहीं है तो गलतियां लोग करते हैं. So you're unlikely to make to correct typing errors. The second is fonts, which is Nastaliq fonts जिस तरह बनी हुई हैं उसमें we have a strong calligraphic tradition तो उसमें लोगों के बहुत aesthetic standards बहुत high हैं कि ब्लाउज में कितनी जगह होनी चाहिए कितना स्पेस होना चाहिए. Those aesthetic standards have not translated in that level of fidelity to the digital forms of Nastaliq. तो जब हम Nastaliq लिखते हैं तो कभी कभार हमें पसंद नहीं आती उसकी प्लेसमेंट स्पेस ना स्पेस तो लोग ये करते हैं कि मर्जी से डाल देते हैं शक्ल.
Really?
So that's a pretty common occurrence. The second occurrence is because the letters are cursive, then the use of the space is inconsistent. So जो letters जुड़ते नहीं आपस उसमें आपने space देना है कि नहीं देना loves के बीच में, because the space in a kind of technological term is used to indicate the end of word, but in our script it can also be used to indicate the end of the grapheme or the words that connect. So जैसे अगर आप क्या लफ्ज लिखें कोई लफ्ज लिखें जिसमें भी बीच में वाव आता हो.
I don't know why I'm thinking,
connect,
but like I'm thinking of like parvaz where pe re ke baad there's a gap and then a wow which also has a gap and it's all one word.
Right. So in that case it's pretty common कि re या wow के बाद space डला हुआ होगा.
Yeah.
And from an underlying technical term, the computer has like no idea what. If you don't know what words are, then you're like, what am I supposed to do? So, अच्छा मैं भी इस मसले में जब पढ़ा I was like, okay, this is bad. So we had to build a data set of our own, and then we open sourced it. So the keyboard is just me. The data set is when a lot of other volunteers came in. So I found 8 or 10 volunteers, roughly that number, who because the data set had to be open source.
Sure.
Because we had to work with other people's existing language, unke saath milke, and then we just it's the sort of work where it lends itself to requiring open collaboration and reuse. So we had a lot of people donate their published text to us. The people that we got donations for text were people that we believed had high language standards. ताकि हमें इतना पता हो कि ज़बान तो ठीक लिखी हुई है, क्योंकि वो एक अलग problem है.
And this is all Urdu we're talking about.
All Urdu.
Right.
So we got text that we thought was editorially and linguistically had some high standard. usko laake then we built software tools and manual processes to start fixing all the digital underlying errors so that the software could start fixing. And then we started annotating it for various reasons. So you could say, acha, one common occurrence in Urdu text is quoting from other languages. So, English quotation, Arabic quotation.
Right.
You have to tell the computer what things not to consider.
Right.
And so we have to go in and label all of that data. And creating a labeled data set is really hard work.
Right.
And so one of the reasons why it's really hard to build Urdu software is that anything you want to go into, you need a labeled data set. And so if everybody had to do this work, then it would become too onerous for anybody to move things forward. So for me, like building the keyboard enabled opportunities to do this kind of work, which is, okay, ye humne data set bana diya. So now if anybody wants to build any other kind of language tech, they could just use the same data set, even if my keyboard has no other underlying utility or usefulness. So that's how I kind of squeezed my way into this corner. And then, so now there's, the dataset project, which kind of is ongoing, continues. We keep fixing things, making it better. And then there is the keyboard project, which hopefully will launch soon.